My granddaughter's hand was ice cold when she grabbed my wrist under the table. We were sitting in the middle of her engagement party at the Fairmont Château Laurier in Ottawa, surrounded by 150 guests, champagne flowing, string quartet playing something elegant I couldn't name. She leaned close to my ear, her voice barely audible above the music, and whispered 6 words that made every nerve in my body go rigid. "Grandpa, he's working with Mom." I didn't flinch, didn't look at her. I picked up my glass, took a slow sip of scotch, and scanned the room. My ex-daughter-in-law, Diane, was standing across the ballroom, laughing with the groom's family. And there was Marcus Webb, my granddaughter's fiancé, his arm draped over a chair, smiling like a man who'd already won. I smiled back at him. Then I started planning. Let me go back to the beginning. My name is Arthur Lawson. I'm 71 years old. I spent 35 years running a commercial real estate firm in Toronto before I sold it and retired to a property outside Kingston. My wife, Helen, passed away 4 years ago from pancreatic cancer. 44 years of marriage, and she left me with one instruction that mattered more than anything in her will. She grabbed my hand in the hospital, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "Arthur, promise me you'll watch over Sophie. She's too good for this world." Sophie is my granddaughter, my son Richard's only child. She's 27, a family physician doing her residency at the Ottawa hospital. Smart, compassionate, the kind of person who stays late to sit with a patient who has nobody else. She got that from Helen, that bottomless well of kindness that made people love her and also made her vulnerable to anyone willing to exploit it. My son Richard divorced Diane 12 years ago. It was ugly. Diane had been having an affair with a colleague, spending money faster than Richard could earn it, racking up credit card debt she hid in separate accounts. When it all came out, she tried to claim half of everything, including assets from the Lawson family trust that I'd set up decades earlier. Her lawyers argued the trust income had been used to fund their lifestyle, so she was entitled to a share. The court disagreed, thankfully, but she walked away with the house in Westboro and a generous spousal support arrangement that Richard agreed to just to end the fighting. Diane resented me for it. She blamed me for convincing Richard to protect the trust. She was right. I did. And I'd do it again. After the divorce, Sophie split her time between her parents. Diane remarried briefly. A man from Montreal who left after 18 months. She bounced between jobs, always just barely getting by. Always with a grievance about how the Lawsons had cheated her out of what she deserved. The Lawson family trust was worth approximately $95 million, built over 3 generations. My father started it with profits from our original property holdings in the GTA. I grew it substantially through commercial developments in Toronto, Ottawa, and Calgary. It was structured as an inter vivos trust under Canadian law, with a corporate trustee and myself as the primary beneficiary and appointer. Sophie was named as a capital beneficiary when she turned 25. My son Richard was also a beneficiary, but Sophie's share was the larger portion. Helen had insisted on that. Sophie had met Marcus Webb 8 months ago at a fundraiser for the Ottawa Food Bank. He told her he was an entrepreneur, ran a boutique consulting firm that helped nonprofits with digital strategy. He was charming, well-dressed, articulate, knew all the right things to say about giving back to the community. Within 3 months, they were living together. Within 5 months, he proposed with a ring that I later learned cost $40,000. For a man running a small consulting firm, his spending didn't match any reasonable income. I met Marcus for the first time at Thanksgiving dinner at Richard's condo in Centertown. He arrived with a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's grocery bill for the week, shook my hand firmly, called me sir, asked me about my career in real estate with the kind of detailed questions that felt rehearsed. He knew too much about our family's finances for someone who'd supposedly just learned about the trust. I kept quiet, watched, listened. What bothered me most wasn't Marcus. It was Diane. Diane hadn't spoken to me voluntarily in over a decade, but at that Thanksgiving dinner, she was warm, friendly, asked about my health, my garden in Kingston, whether I'd considered downsizing. She even mentioned Helen, said she missed her, which was a lie so transparent it almost made me laugh. Diane had once told Helen to her face that she was a doormat. Something was wrong. I could feel it the way you feel a storm coming before the sky changes. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, Sophie called me. She sounded excited but nervous. "Grandpa, Marcus thinks I should talk to a financial advisor about the trust. He says there might be tax advantages to restructuring my beneficiary status now that we're getting married." "What kind of restructuring?" He mentioned something about adding him as a joint beneficiary or creating a spousal trust that would let us manage the assets together. He says his advisor can explain it better than he can. His advisor. Who is this advisor? Someone Marcus works with. A financial planner named Craig. He's supposed to be really good. Sophie, you have a trust lawyer. David McAllister has managed our family's legal affairs for 25 years. If there are tax considerations, he's the person to talk to, not someone Marcus found. She went quiet for a moment. "You don't like Marcus, do you?" "I like you. I want you to be happy. But I also want you to be careful. These are decisions that affect your entire financial future. Marcus says you'd react this way. He says older generations don't understand modern approaches to shared finances." That line. That calculated, dismissive line. It wasn't something Marcus would say casually. Someone had coached him on how to neutralize my objections. After we hung up, I poured myself a whiskey and sat in Helen's reading chair. I thought about Diane's sudden warmth at Thanksgiving, about Marcus knowing details of our family finances, about this convenient advisor named Craig who wanted to restructure a $95 million trust. The next morning, I called David McAllister. "David, hypothetically, if Sophie married and her husband was added as a co-beneficiary to the trust, what exposure would we have? Significant. If he's a named beneficiary with distribution rights, he could potentially request distributions directly from the corporate trustee. Depending on how the trust deed is amended, he might not even need Sophie's consent. Could someone drain the trust quickly? If they had the right documentation and the trustee was instructed to comply, funds could be moved within days. Wire transfers to offshore accounts, shell corporations. By the time you noticed, the money could be in 3 different jurisdictions. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called a private investigator. Her name was Janet Fong. Based in Ottawa, came highly recommended by a retired RCMP officer I knew from my Rotary Club days. I told her everything. Marcus Webb, Diane's sudden friendliness, the push to restructure the trust. Janet started digging. What she found over the next 2 weeks made me physically ill. Marcus Webb wasn't an entrepreneur. He was a professional marriage fraudster. His real name was Marcus David Poole, born in Brampton, Ontario. He had a string of aliases and a pattern that stretched back nearly a decade. He targeted women with family wealth, particularly women who were beneficiaries of trusts or estates. He'd romance them, propose quickly, push for financial integration, and then disappear with whatever he could extract. His first victim was a woman in Kitchener whose family owned a chain of auto dealerships. He married her, convinced her to take a loan against her trust, funneled $600,000 through a numbered company, and vanished. She never pressed charges because he'd structured everything to look like legitimate financial planning. His second victim was in Winnipeg, a school teacher who'd inherited $2 million from her grandmother. Marcus married her, got himself added to her investment accounts within weeks, transferred everything to an offshore account in Belize, and filed for divorce before she even realized the money was gone. The third was in Halifax. Same pattern. Young woman, family money, quick engagement, financial manipulation, disappearance. He'd taken $1.4 million. But here's what turned my stomach. In every single case, Marcus had an inside partner, someone close to the victim who fed him information, helped him gain trust, and got a cut of the proceeds. In Kitchener, it was the victim's cousin. In Winnipeg, it was a family friend. In Halifax, it was the victim's stepmother. And in Ottawa, it was Diane. Janet found the connection buried in bank records. Diane and Marcus shared a numbered company registered in New Brunswick. There were wire transfers between Diane's personal account and the company going back 14 months. well before Marcus supposedly met Sophie at the food bank fundraiser. They'd been planning this for over a year. Janet also found text messages between them, obtained through a source she didn't fully explain and I didn't ask about. The messages were clinical, cold. They discussed Sophie like she was a project. One message from Diane read, "She trusts me completely now. I told her Arthur is just paranoid because of what happened with me and Richard. She's starting to pull away from him." Marcus had replied, "Good. The old man is the only obstacle. Once she's isolated from him, we move on the trust amendment. Craig has the paperwork ready." Craig, the financial advisor. Janet ran him down too. Craig Baxter, also operating under an alias. His real name was Craig Muller, a disbarred paralegal from BC who'd been struck off for forging legal documents. He was the one who prepared the fraudulent trust amendments, fake beneficiary forms, and forged signatures in Marcus's previous schemes. The three of them, Marcus, Diane, and Craig, were a professional fraud ring, and my granddaughter was their next target. I sat in Janet's office staring at the file. Photos, bank statements, court records, text messages. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from rage. "How much do they expect to take?" I asked. "Based on the documents Craig's been preparing, they're planning to amend Sophie's beneficiary status to include Marcus as a joint beneficiary with independent distribution rights. Then they'll request a distribution of approximately $30 million, move it through 3 shell companies, and park it offshore. The whole thing could be done within a week of the wedding. And Diane's cut looks like 40%. Around $12 million. $12 million. That's what my granddaughter's own mother was willing to sell her for. I wanted to drive to Diane's house and confront her. I wanted to grab Marcus by his expensive collar and throw him into the Rideau Canal. But Janet was right when she told me what she told me next. "Mr. Lawson, if you confront them, they'll deny everything. Marcus will tell Sophie you're trying to control her. Diane will cry and play the victim. And they'll either convince Sophie you're the problem, or they'll disappear and set up the same scheme somewhere else. You need to let this play out just far enough that there's no room for denial, and then shut it down permanently." "What do you mean permanently?" "I mean we involve the police. Not after they've taken the money. Before. We catch them in the act, and we make sure they face criminal charges. Fraud over $5,000 is an indictable offense in Canada. They could each face up to 14 years. I looked at the file on her desk. All those other victims, Kitchener, Winnipeg, Halifax, none of them had pressed charges. None of them had stopped these people. I wasn't going to make that mistake. The engagement party was scheduled for a Saturday evening at the Château Laurier. Marcus had insisted on something grand. Naturally, he'd told Sophie he was paying for it himself, but Janet had confirmed the deposits were coming from money Sophie had already given him for wedding expenses. He was throwing a party with my granddaughter's own money. In the 3 weeks before the party, I worked with Janet and David McAllister to prepare. David contacted the RCMP's Integrated Financial Crime Unit and walked them through everything Janet had found. They were interested. Very interested. Marcus Poole was already on their radar from the Halifax case, but they hadn't had enough to move on him. They had enough now. The plan was delicate. The RCMP needed Marcus, Diane, and Craig to take one more overt step toward executing the fraud, something that would demonstrate criminal intent beyond any doubt. That step was the trust amendment documents. If Craig produced them and Marcus or Diane presented them to Sophie for signature, that was conspiracy to commit fraud. The RCMP could arrest all three on the spot. I arrived at the Château Laurier early that Saturday. Checked into my room, sat by the window looking out at the Ottawa River, and thought about Helen. "You'd know what to do," I said to the empty room. "You always knew." Janet texted me at 5 o'clock. "Craig Muller checked into the hotel an hour ago, room 412. He's got a briefcase." Marcus arrived at 6. I watched from the lobby as he walked in. Perfectly tailored suit, confident stride. He shook hands with the concierge like he owned the place. Diane arrived separately, which struck me as odd until I realized they were being careful not to be seen together before the party. The engagement party started at 7. The ballroom was stunning. White linens, tall floral arrangements, candlelight reflecting off the chandeliers. Sophie looked beautiful in a navy dress, her hair pinned up the way Helen used to wear hers. She was smiling, greeting guests, holding Marcus's hand. It took every ounce of self-control I had to shake that man's hand when he came over to greet me. "Arthur, great to see you." Marcus's grip was firm, his smile wide. "Sophie's so glad you made it. She talks about you all the time." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. I found my seat at the family table. Richard was there, looking uncomfortable. He'd never warmed to Marcus either, but Sophie had accused him of being jealous and bitter about the divorce whenever he raised concerns. Diane was 2 tables away, laughing loudly, playing the supportive mother. Dinner was served. Toasts were made. Marcus gave a speech about how Sophie had changed his life, how he'd never known what love meant before her. I watched Sophie's face while he spoke. She was smiling, but her eyes kept darting to me. At 8:30, Marcus excused himself, said he needed to take a call about a client emergency. I watched him cross the ballroom, watched Diane casually excuse herself 2 minutes later. They left through different doors, but I knew where they were going. Janet texted, both heading to 4th floor. Craig's room. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then Sophie leaned over and grabbed my wrist under the table. "Grandpa, he's working with Mom." I looked at her. Her eyes were wide, scared, but also sharp, determined. "How long have you known?" 2 weeks. I found messages on his phone, between him and Mom. They're planning to take money from the trust. There's a man named Craig who has fake documents. My chest tightened, not with surprise, but with pride. My girl had figured it out on her own. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I needed to be sure. And because I was ashamed. She blinked hard. "I thought he loved me." "Sophie, listen to me carefully. I already know. I've known for weeks. I hired an investigator, and the RCMP is here tonight." Her eyes went wide. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She nodded. I excused myself from the table, told Richard I needed to stretch my legs, took the elevator to the 4th floor. Janet was already there, standing at the end of the hallway near room 412 with 2 plainclothes RCMP officers. "They're all inside," Janet said quietly. "Audio is clear." I stood in that hallway and listened through the door. Diane's voice. "She's completely isolated from Arthur now. She barely talks to him. If he tries to interfere after the wedding, I'll tell Sophie he's going senile, that he tried to control Richard the same way." "Marcus. Craig, is the paperwork ready?" A third voice, nasal and precise. "Ready to go. Beneficiary amendment. Distribution request for $32 million. Wire transfer authorizations to 3 accounts in the Caymans and 1 in Singapore. All we need is her signature. I've got a forged version of the trustee's authorization as backup, but it's cleaner if she signs voluntarily. When do we move?" "Monday morning. Right after the ceremony. I'll have the documents ready at the hotel. Tell Sophie it's a tax filing that needs to happen before year-end. She won't question it if Diane's there backing you up." Diane laughed. She never questions anything her mother tells her. That was the moment. I felt it like a physical force. Not rage this time. Something colder. Something precise. I nodded to the RCMP officers. The knock on the door was firm. Professional. "RCMP. Open the door, please." Silence inside. Then shuffling. The door opened, and Marcus was standing there, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and then pure panic when he saw me standing behind the officers. "What is this?" His voice cracked. "Marcus David Poole, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud over $5,000. The officer's voice was calm, practiced. "You have the right to retain and instruct counsel without delay." Diane tried to push past Marcus, heading for the hallway, but the second officer stepped in front of her. "Diane Lawson, you're also under arrest. You can't do this." Diane's face was red. "This is a family matter. Arthur, tell them, this is a misunderstanding." I looked at her, the woman who'd married my son, who'd sat at our family table for 15 years, who'd held Sophie as a baby. The woman who was now willing to rob her own daughter. It's no misunderstanding, Diane. Craig tried a different approach. He started talking about his rights, about illegal surveillance, about how nothing in the room constituted evidence. The officer let him finish, then calmly informed him that the RCMP had obtained a judicial authorization for the audio surveillance 3 days earlier, and that his briefcase full of forged trust documents was going to be a problem. They cuffed all 3 of them, led them out through the service corridor so the engagement party guests wouldn't see. Professional, quiet, efficient. I stood in that empty hallway for a long time. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Sophie was standing at the end of the corridor. She'd followed me up. Is it done? It's done. She walked toward me. Slowly, at first, then faster. She put her arms around me and held on, like she was drowning. She was crying. Not the dramatic, loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that comes when something you suspected but hoped wasn't true turns out to be exactly as bad as you feared. Mom actually did this. Her own mother. I held my granddaughter and didn't say anything. Some moments don't need words. We went downstairs together. I stood beside her while she addressed the guests. She was composed, dignified, clinical in the way only a doctor can be. I'm sorry to tell you that the engagement is off. I've learned some things tonight that make it impossible for me to marry Marcus. I appreciate you all being here, and I'm sorry for the inconvenience. No tears, no drama, just clarity. Helen would have been so proud. Richard found me afterward. He looked shell-shocked. Diane was in on it? From the beginning. They've been planning this for over a year. My ex-wife tried to steal from my daughter. He sat down heavily, and I didn't see it. Neither did Sophie. These people are professionals, Richard. This is what they do. He looked at me. How did you know? Because your mother told me to watch over Sophie. And I listened. Sophie spent that night at my hotel room. We ordered room service and talked until 2 in the morning. She asked me everything. How I'd found out. What Janet had discovered. The other victims in Kitchener and Winnipeg and Halifax. All those other women. She said. Nobody stopped him. I know. You stopped him. We stopped him. You figured it out too, Sophie. You saw those messages and you didn't look away. That took courage. She was quiet for a while. Then she said something that nearly broke me. Grandma told me once that the hardest thing about trust isn't giving it. It's knowing when to take it back. I didn't understand what she meant until tonight. Your grandmother was the wisest person I ever knew. Do you think I'll be able to trust someone again? I poured her a cup of tea and sat across from her. Yes. But here's what Helen would tell you. Don't look for someone who seems perfect. Perfect doesn't exist. Look for someone who shows you exactly who they are, including the parts they're not proud of. That's honesty. And honesty is the only foundation that holds. She nodded. I'll try. And Sophie, trust your instincts. You knew something was wrong. You felt it before you found the proof. Don't ever ignore that feeling. The next few months were difficult. The RCMP's investigation expanded as they connected Marcus Poole's Ottawa case to his previous schemes across the country. Craig Muller cooperated almost immediately, gave up everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. He provided detailed records of all 4 frauds, including bank accounts, wire transfers, and communication logs. Marcus tried to fight it, hired an expensive defense lawyer, argued entrapment, claimed the documents were hypothetical financial planning tools. The judge didn't buy it. Between the audio recordings, Craig's testimony, the forged documents, and the pattern of prior offenses, the Crown had a case that was close to airtight. Diane was the one who surprised me. She pleaded guilty, stood in the courtroom and admitted everything. I don't know if it was genuine remorse or just a calculation that cooperation would reduce her sentence. Either way, she looked at Sophie in the gallery and said, I'm sorry. I have no excuse. Sophie didn't respond, just sat there, straight-backed, dry-eyed. She'd done her crying in private. Marcus received 8 years. Craig got 4 with his cooperation agreement. Diane received 5. The judge noted the particular cruelty of a mother conspiring to defraud her own child. The trust remained intact. Every dollar. David McAllister added additional safeguards. multi-party authorization for any amendments, mandatory 30-day cooling periods for distribution requests, independent trustee oversight. Nobody would ever get close to that money again without going through layers of protection. 6 months after the arrests, Sophie came to visit me in Kingston. She looked different, stronger, more settled. She'd been seeing a therapist, working through the double betrayal, the man she'd loved and the mother who'd sold her out. We sat on my porch, looking out at the lake. "I started a new rotation at the hospital," she said. "Emergency medicine. It's intense, but I love it." "Good. You need something that keeps you focused," she smiled. "I also adopted a dog, a rescue from the Ottawa Humane Society. His name is Walter." "Walter. Good name. I named him after you." "Well, your middle name," I laughed. I hadn't laughed that hard in a long time. Then she got serious. "Grandpa, I've been thinking about what you said, about looking for honest instead of perfect. And I met someone. Another resident at the hospital. His name is James. He's a terrible cook. His car is 15 years old, and he told me on our second date that he has student loans that will take him a decade to pay off." She paused. "He's not trying to impress me. He's just himself." "Sounds promising. I'm taking it slow. Really slow. But I wanted you to know. I'm glad you told me." She looked out at the water. "Grandma would like him, I think. He's honest. That's all that matters." After she left, I sat in Helen's chair. The light was fading over the lake, the way it does in autumn in Ontario. The trees blazing orange and red, the air carrying that clean, cold edge that tells you winter is coming. I thought about what it means to protect someone, not by controlling them, not by making their decisions for them, but by making sure they have the truth, the whole truth, even when it's ugly, even when it hurts, and then trusting them to do the right thing with it. I'd made a promise to Helen, and I'd kept it. Sophie was safe. The people who tried to hurt her were facing consequences. And my granddaughter, my brilliant, kind, resilient granddaughter, was finding her way back. People ask me sometimes whether I regret how I handled it, whether I should have told Sophie the moment I found out, confronted Marcus directly, cut Diane off sooner. The answer is no. Sophie needed to be part of discovering the truth. She needed to know that her own instincts had been right. If I'd just handed her a file of evidence, she might have always wondered, might have doubted, might have thought I was the one manipulating her. Instead, she knew, with absolute certainty, and that certainty, as painful as it was, set her free. I think about Marcus and Diane sometimes, sitting in their cells, and I feel nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, nothing. They made their choices. They're living with the consequences. That's how justice works. But mostly, I think about Helen. I think about her sitting in this chair, reading her books, looking out at this same lake. I think about the last thing she ever said to me. "Watch over Sophie, Arthur. She has my heart." I did, Helen. I watched over her, and she's going to be just fine.